Ramones fans, and welcome to the Pinhead Pod. I am your host, Dave Dynasty. Thank you for joining me yet again for another episode. Remember, this show is available on all major podcast platforms, and we are all over social media, so it's pretty much anywhere out there you might want to find it. So all you got to do is go search for Pinhead Pod. Make sure you tell all your friends, help spread the word, and make sure all the Ramones fans in your life know about this podcast. Now, coming up on this episode, my guest is Rick Johnson, the longtime friend of the Ramones, who also saw the band live 106 times. And he's also one of the coordinators for the annual Record Store Day. That interview is coming up in just a bit. Before we get there, let's talk about the news for June. Recently, the Smashing Pumpkins' Bill Corgan, I'm not going to call him Billy, I'm calling him Bill, stirred some controversy when he said in an interview that he believes Green Day are bigger than the Ramones. Now, to be fair, I guess I understand the thinking, right? Hey, from a purely record sales, blah, 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 blah. Sure, Green Day, one of the top bands of all time. I mean, let's be frank. But you're comparing apples to oranges here, right? You can't compare Green Day to the Ramones. It's just not, you can't just say flat out, oh, they're both punk bands. No, it doesn't work that way, right? Because, no offense to Green Day, but without the Ramones, there would be no Green Day. There would be no other band that followed quite the same way. It would have been a different trajectory. So, you know what? I mean, no disrespect to Green Day. I mean, you know what? I'm not even going to say I don't mean disrespect to Billy Corgan, because I just think it's a ridiculous statement to make. I mean, just don't. Right? You can't compare the two. I'm sorry. Green Day are not bigger than the Ramones. Very few are. Just whatever. Just stay in your lane, Billy. All right, also, Ricky Rochelle has released yet another single. This one is called I Miss Joey. Remember, Ricky is a musician from Long Beach, New York, who performs solo as well as with the young Rochelles and the new Rochelles. You can find the single on all the streaming music platforms, and you can follow Ricky on all the social media platforms. Thanks to Ricky, you can hear that single again right here at the end of this episode. So listen for that at the close of the episode. I'd also like to highlight the band Adios Fatso. They are a Massachusetts-based project led by Sir Ken Selly. Their music is punk rock based and inspired by the Ramones, but it blends many other elements to reflect the chaos of modern civilization. And guys, anybody who's real, anybody who's honest knows, man, modern civilization is very chaotic. Here in just a few minutes, you will hear their song, You, Me, and Everyone. So stand by for that. Now, some dates in Ramone history for June. June 29th, 1978, Marky Ramone played his first show with the band in Poughkeepsie, New York. June 18th, 1996, Greatest Hits Live was released. The album was recorded on February 29th, 1996 at the Academy in New York City. It was released on Radioactive Records, produced by Daniel Ray and Ed Stasium. The album did feature two new studio recorded covers. One of Motorhead's Ramones, Ramones, and the other, the Dave Clark Five's Any Way You Want It. All right. On June 5th, 2002, Dee Dee Ramone passed away. Dee Dee was born Douglas Glenn Calvin on September 18th, 1951 at Fort Gregg, Adams, Virginia. He passed away in Los Angeles due to a heroin overdose. Dee Dee is buried at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, not far from bandmate Johnny Ramone. On June 8th, 2013, Arturo Vega passed away. Arturo was born October 13th, 1947 in Chihuahua, Mexico. He passed away in New York from cancer. Arturo handled much of the design work for the Ramones projects, including the design of the so famous, Ramones presidential seal logo. Between 1974 and 1996, Arturo only missed a handful of Ramones concerts. And if you talk about key non-performing band members, obviously the two most important names in the history of the Ramones that were not, on stage were Monty Melnick, of course, and Arturo Vega. I stand very strong on that, thinking those are two of the most key players in this team through their entire careers, and you cannot underestimate either one of their importance in the history of this band. All right, then, let's get right to it. This episode guest is, again, Rick Johnson. So we're going to get ready to take a break, and leading us to break is the song You, Me, and Everyone from Adios Fatso. It's a short one, so just stick around and listen to it, and then we'll come back with the interview from Rick Johnson, so stick around.
There's no punchline. It's not a joke.
Me and everyone else.
If you like horror movies, be sure to check out Dave Dynasty and Ike Isaacs on the Listen to Their Screams Horror Podcast. It is available on all podcast platforms and on social media at Listen to Screams. That is Listen, the number 2, and Screams. All right, and welcome back to the Pinhead Pod. This time I'm being joined by Rick Johnson, a longtime Ramones fan and a friend of the band and one of the coordinators for the annual Record Store Day. Rick, how are you?
Hey, what's up? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive right into this, right? You went to Wake Forest and Winston-Salem, correct?
Yes, long time ago. I sure did.
Yeah. Are you originally from North Carolina?
I'm from Statesville, the little town of Statesville. That's where Interstate 40 and Interstate 77 where they cross. And so I grew up in that tiny little town, and then I moved to Winston-Salem and went to Wake Forest, which was 5 of the toughest years of my life. They have a saying, Wake Forest University, where your best hasn't been good enough since 1834. It was so damn hard.
Yeah.
I should have gone to Carolina, or I should have gone to Georgia or somewhere where I could have, done my work, but then had more fun, because Wake was kind of, it's just a tiny little campus, and, there's not much around it. And it's mostly fraternity, sorority driven. And I worked I didn't work my way through school, but I worked full time. While I was at school, I worked for the Record Exchange. I would go to school from like 9 to 1, and then go to the local record store and work there from 1 to 6 or 1 to 9, and then go to the library and study, and then get up and do it all over again. But working at the Record Exchange was probably one of the best experiences of my life. Because, most of these musicians that you talk to, from Lenny Kaye to Peter Buck, you talk to them, and, their first job was, they're working in a little record store, and that's where a lot of us start out.
Yeah.
But that was where I was able to, working at that store helped me meet the Ramones and helped me become friends with them, through setting up the in-stores and, just knowing where they were, because I'd be in touch with the record labels and stuff.
Yeah. We'll get to that point, but let me ask you first, prior to college, right? Prior to the Wake Forest years, growing up North Carolina, at that time, what were your musical tastes like? And how did you develop kind of your musical taste? Right. A lot of people have those, parental influences and everything else. So what were you listening to prior to college?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And Monty said that you were a really good interviewer, and he's absolutely right. I grew up in Statesville, which is, small town. So I listened to small town radio, and there was a local AM station, WSIC, still there, and they would play, the Doobie Brothers. And I remember hearing Steve Martin's King Tut when that was, I would but back then, you had your $6 transistor radio, and you would, it just like that song that Joey says, you have your radio under the covers at night waiting for them, to play your favorite song.
Yep.
And as I grew older, maybe 7th or 8th grade, I was drawn to the FM station called WOOO. It was 000 97, and they played more some urban stuff. Like I would hear a lot of Parliament Funkadelic there, which really loved. In 77, 78, we were all into Bootsy Collins and into Parliament. And, Wild Cherry, play that funky music, that kind of stuff. And I was kind of drawn to that radio station, and I'd go up there and it's just some 10 12-year-old kid, I'd sit there, while the DJs played the songs. And I remember when Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell came out, that would have been 77. I went to the local Kmart, and my mom bought that for me. And I remember they were doing a radio, I don't know what you call it, where I guess like a location thing day, the radio station at Kmart. And I remember walking in there, and I remember seeing the cover of Leonard Skinner and Street Survivors, with the flames before. It was right before the plane wreck, I think. And I bought Bat Out of Hell. And as I was walking out, I remember one of the DJs seeing me, and he was like, "Hey, Rick, don't let your meatloaf." And and then there was Rolling Stones. I remember buying Hot Rocks. I remember buying in '78. They reissued, or maybe they put out the Beatles Blue albums and Red albums.
Yep.
So I bought those, and rock and roll music. I think there was a resurgence. I don't know exactly why for the Beatles in '78. So I was into that stuff. And then as I got a bit older, and this, I wasn't exposed to the Ramones. I wasn't exposed to the Sex Pistols. I wasn't exposed to the Clash. So I remember buying REO Speedwagon's High Fidelity, buying Boston's first album, buying, I hate to say it, buying Journey records and listening to the radio stations. And, it was about, 13, 14. And I had heard the Police, I got the first Police album. I won it from the local radio station, and the first Joe Jackson album that I won, that would have been maybe 78, 79. So I was exposed to that. And then I remember them playing Take Me to the River, the Talking Heads. And I remember Message in a Bottle. This was 13, 14. But then the watershed moment was when I was in ninth grade, and I went to a high school party at a friend of mine's older brother's house, and met my friend Sam Madison, who had just come into town. And Sam was like the Johnny Appleseed of punk. He had just moved from Knoxville, and they were all into the stuff around that time, Devo and 999 and Gang of Four. Yeah. And I remember listening to the first Specials album. They were playing the first Specials album. Yeah. And it completely changed my life. And the next day I remember giving my sister all my, 38 Bon Journey Wagon albums and just giving them to her. And I remember buying Dance Craze, that the ska compilation. Then I bought the first Specials album. Then I bought, I think my first Clash album was that Black Market Clash 10-inch, because back then you didn't have a lot of money, so everything had to count. So I was like, oh, here's 12 songs for $4. I'm gonna buy that. And then I remember like September of '81. I was 15 buying Nevermind the Bollocks. And then I remember checking out Rocket to Russia from my local library. If you can believe that the local library had Rocket to Russia. And I remember checking it out and putting it on. I can still remember it. And I immediately recorded it to cassette and just played it constantly. And, that's probably still my favorite Ramones album. Yeah. It's just the classic album, but it was just so amazing. And then I think the first one I actually bought was, it would have been '81. So Pleasant Dreams was out. Yeah. And I used to go to the 7-Eleven when I was a kid. I used to collect the comic cups. Yeah. And the wacky packages and and all that stuff. So, that was back when you could get candy for a penny. I think the penny candy costs 35 cents now. But I love the 7-Eleven. So I was looking on the back of the record, and Joey had written a song called, 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
I met her at the 7-Eleven, and so I bought that and really liked the song, We've Got the Airwaves.
Yeah.
And I can remember my sister's 3 years younger. I remember her and I singing that, oh yeah, oh right. And then from then on, I was just, I was into punk. And then we started a hardcore band in '82. It was called Bloodmobile. We used to play with Corrosion of Conformity when they were just starting out.
Oh yeah.
We would play the Milestone, and then we would go to Raleigh. The Milestone's in Charlotte, and then we would go to Raleigh and play at the brewery, or we would play with them. And it was back when they just started, so we would. We would open for them, they would open for us. And there was a band called Fight for Life. My friend Jeff Clayton was in that band, and a few months later they started Anti-Scene, which has become, they're still together, and they're still great. And Jeff and I are still good friends. But we were on a little EP in '83. Corrosion of Conformity asked us to be on it with, I think, Stillborn Christians and No Labels. And we had 3 songs. I was the bass player, because I think, I don't know if it's true now, but, I was the least talented member of that band, and my mom had a station wagon. So but I remember driving, we got to open up for Circle Jerks in '84.
Oh, yeah.
And at the Milestone. And I remember driving up there, with all the equipment in the back of my mom's little Dodge station wagon. And we first went to the mall and drank beer in the parking lot. And then you would make the little bongs from the empty beer cans, and we would smoke hash, and then we'd go run around the mall like idiots. And then we went over to the Milestone, and we got there, and the owner, Bill Flowers, said he was outside, and he was like, no, there's too many bands on the bill. You guys can't play. And it so happened that Keith Morris, the great Keith Morris from the Circle Jerks, happened to be standing outside. And I can still remember to this day, Keith was like, hey man, they drove all this way, let them play. And so we got to play. And that was kind of the first inkling that I had that, punk and hardcore was, more than just a music genre. It was kind of a family where everybody looked out for each other, and everybody stuck together, even if you didn't really know them. Because a lot of us, there weren't very many of us in my school, and we got picked on some. So when you found your people, you certainly tried to stick up for them. But that was my high school thing. It was, regular stuff up until I heard the first Specials album, and then from then on, it was punk and then hardcore.
Yeah, it's so hard to explain to people, modern, kids now or whatever you want. I don't want to sound like an old guy, but like I grew up through the '80s, right? And I was listening to whatever I could, but it's like I was listening to harder edge stuff, right? But it was a lot of what I got on my dad's record collection, right? And I was leaning towards the early Zeppelin stuff and stuff like that because it felt raw, a little raw,
and it was raw.
Yeah, and it's like, but you didn't have a label for that, right? It was just like, I like this, I like this feel. And then it's like, then all of a sudden when you discover punk and you're like, yeah, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. Yeah. And it's not there. And the best thing about punk to me, I mean, I love the music, right? But is that do-it-yourself attitude, right? Because I totally did that as well, right? It's like in high school, I played guitar, and it's like anybody that played anything, I'm like, yeah, we got to play together, right? Exactly. I don't care what you play, what you like. Let's just come play. I mean, I played with saxophone players. I played with whatever, just because. And I was making these weird ass mixtapes to give to people, just to do, right? Just just
Yeah.
recording weird stuff and giving out there, but just because I felt like, you know what, I could, and
Yeah.
I wanted to, and
Yep.
that's one of the great things, and a lot of that, all of that, maybe alludes back to the Ramones and that stripping down,
Yep.
that whole, screw what's being played on AM FM radio, screw the Boston, the Journeys, that boring stuff, screw these keyboard self-indulgent stuff. Let's just strip back, basic rock and roll, have some fun. And you know what? If you're not a virtuoso, who cares? You can
Yeah.
still play rock and roll and have fun, because so many of us, that's what we were looking for, was that.
Exactly.
And you're known, right? We'll get touch on it a little more here later, but you've seen the Ramones many times. When did you first see them live after discovering them?
It was November of 1987. They played 3 dates in North Carolina. They played the Mad Monk, which was a famous club in Wilmington, North Carolina. And so I drove down there and saw them and, tried to get to meet them. I found out what hotel they were going to be at. And so I waited at the hotel, and then I went back to the club, and Dee Dee happened to be standing outside, and I was like, oh my God, you're Dee Dee Ramone. Do you have any idea all the bands you've influenced? And he was like, yeah, hey, go ask those kids over there if they know where to get some Coke. And I was like, I was so deflated. I was like, dude, but you could tell. I remember seeing him that night, and he was sniffing and jonesing and, not really playing well. And I remember that. But then I drove back over to the hotel, and Monty had just driven up. And I always kid him about this, but the first thing I ever said to him was, I'm Rick Johnson. I want to make sure I'm on the guest list because I had gotten on the guest list from this Warner Brothers person I knew, Julie Panabianco, who, was kind of a big deal at Warner Brothers. And he was like, how do you know Julie? It was like, they were in backwoods North Carolina, and somebody was, but I was just a clerk at the record store. I just had to like to talk to people. But Joey was there, so I got to meet Joey and got him to sign a few things. And then I was still wanting to see Johnny, so I was walking around the side of the hotel, and it was a motel. It was kind of a smaller thing.
Yeah.
And here comes Johnny just walking around the corner, and it was almost like a cartoon come to life. It was like, because Johnny was my favorite. It's like, oh my God, there's Johnny Ramone. And I was like, hey, Johnny, can you sign some autographs? And he was like, later, because he had just driven all that way and wanted to get to his hotel room. So, so I saw the show that night, and I got some good pictures. I was up in the front. But there was a friend of mine, John Danich, that wanted to sneak his video camera in. Oh, yeah. And back then, now everybody's got a super video camera in their pocket. Yep. Back then, those video cameras were big.
Yep.
So I snuck it in somehow in my camera bag, because I had a camera that I was going to use to take photos. It was like a Nikon AE1 or something, or a Canon AE1. And so I snuck the video camera in, and John stood in the back and filmed that show. It's still on YouTube. The Ramones, November 1987 at the Mad Monk. But back then, and Johnny, it would be driving Johnny crazy now with all the people filming their shows, because you can see him. He spots the video camera. And the Ramones were always wanted to make sure nobody was making money off of them or, taking advantage of them. And so John would see the camera, and he would point to my friend John Danich and try to get one of his roadies to, go and find him. And then John would, hide the camera. And so when you watch that video, it's going good. And then all of a sudden it's just a shot of the ceiling for 5 minutes before it comes down. So my first show is actually, because John and I snuck that camera in, that first show is on YouTube, which it's just really wild. And then I was real upset because I didn't really get to meet them properly. So I went to their show the next night in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where East Carolina University is, and there's a famous club there called the Attic. So I went to that, and I was in the front again. And I found out Joey was like, hey, thanks to everybody who came out to Turtles Records to, while we did the in-store. And my heart just sank. I was like, oh man, I didn't even know that there was an in-store, So I was there at the show and I was starstruck. And so I put and this is something that anybody with any sense would know not to do. I put my hand on Johnny's leg during the show, and he gave me this kick, not like a really hard kick, but just kicked me like right in the chest with his toe, and told me, because that's John's stage, and so I was like, man, this is really not going well. And during the show, I had my hands up. And for some reason, they allow beer bottles there. So somebody threw a beer bottle, and it glanced off my fingers and landed right in front of Johnny and just broke into a million pieces. And Johnny looks up, and of course, I'm the guy with his hand up. And he thinks I've thrown a beer bottle at him because he kicked me in the chest. And I was trying to tell him, he's like, it's not me. It's not me. So after that show, I was just devastated, because I love these guys. I really wanted to meet them. So they were playing the next night in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is like 6 hours away. And I was like, I'm not going to this. I'm not going to this. This is, and I had lost my ID. So I was, you have to, back then, I think maybe they wouldn't even let you in without ID. So I, just had to, I don't know how I got in, but I decided to go to the Charlotte show, and I went, and it was an amazing show. It was, one of the best ones I've ever seen. There was a crowd. There was a literal pile of people. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. They're right in front of Joey, and they would climb on top of each other, towering, taller than Joey. And the stage was about 3 feet high. Mm-hmm. And then every once in a while, one of them would fall off and fall on the stage. And the roadie would come out and grab him, and Johnny would try to kick him in the butt on the way off the stage. And I'd never seen anything like it. Yeah. But towards the end of the show, I was right in front of Johnny all 3 nights. My whole thing is I want to be as close as I can to experience it. And I wanted to be right in front of Johnny. And he would throw guitar picks, so I would catch him. I've got a pick probably from the first 9 shows. But I took out my Sharpie. This was like towards the end, and I made like a, like a signature motion, trying to remind him that this sounds so stupid, that 2 days ago I had asked him at a hotel to sign autographs for me. And so I went outside, and I was pretty sad and dejected at this point. And I got my albums out of the car just in case. And then you got to argue with the bouncer who wants you to leave. You got to argue with the bouncer to get back in. And I was standing there, and I saw John peek his head out of the curtain backstage and point at me. And then Arturo Vega, who's, is mm-hmm. the guy who designed the logo and basically the fifth Ramone, came out and said, "You're going back." And Johnny remembered, and they brought me back. Arturo brought me backstage, and John was, was like, hey, I've seen you at the 3 shows. Let me sign these things. And he said, I'm sorry I kicked you last night. And I remember him saying, you can't ever tell who's crazy out there and who's not. And he was just really nice and just like a wonderful, smart, charming dude. And, I told him I went to Wake Forest, and he asked how my football team did. And I didn't care about sports. I was like, I don't know. I'm here with the Ramones, dude. So this was another thing I shouldn't have done. I don't know why, because I loved that band. I asked him. This was before I knew how germophobic John was.
Uh-huh.
I asked him if I could touch his hair. And darn if he didn't let me touch his hair. I think, he saw me as just some little brother that was a big fan. And, this was 87. This was in the middle of the hair metal days and punk. And grunge really hadn't come along. So the Ramones, were not at the top of their popularity. So I think seeing somebody that got just how great they were, I think that appealed to John, and that I was, fairly normal guy when, most of the guys in his band were, not really normal people. And then I talked to Joey some, and Joey gave me his hotel key from the night before. Back then you had the keys and you had to return them.
Oh, yeah.
So I've still got that. And then John wanted me to come the next night in Norfolk, and he goes, so you should come, to the show tomorrow night in Norfolk, which I couldn't because it was like 6 hours away at a school the next day. And John turned to Monty, and John was like, hey, Monty, put Rick Johnson on the guest list. And Monty, God bless him, Monty blew my cover. Monty was like, what do you mean? He's been on the guest list the past 3 nights.
Oh, no.
And I was just looking. I was just waiting. And there was like a pause of like 5 seconds. And I was waiting for John to scream at me. And he just burst out with the best laugh. Like, this guy got something on us. This guy's been traveling to see our shows for free. And it was just that beautiful smile. John's got the best smile. There's not a lot of pictures of him smiling, but it's wonderful, happy dude. And he gets a lot of bad press, I think. Not bad press, but a lot of flack from the fact that he was a conservative or a Republican. I think people like to bash him because of his political beliefs. But back then, what was that, 90? I mean, I had no idea. I didn't know the difference between a Republican and a Democrat.
Yeah.
And I didn't care.
Yeah.
But he was just the nicest dude. And so then he was like, well, we got to go. And so I got to walk out the back with the Ramones, and several of my friends were waiting outside. And it was like, holy fuck, there's Rick Johnson walking out with the Ramones. And it was like, how did this happen? I'm like, I do not know. But it was so great. So that was the first 3 times that I saw him. And there was just a range of emotions, from up to down to getting kicked in the chest, to having to drive, 5 hours in the middle of the night and get home at 6 o'clock and try to get some rest before you got to go to work. Then you got to go to the show. So if I could say anything to the kids out there, it's, you have to persevere, because good things will happen if you never give up,
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, right, working for the record exchange. And ultimately you wound up, correct me if I'm wrong, you were put in charge of doing scheduling or whatever, their in-store appearances. Is that right?
Well, the way that worked out was I was friends with some of the people at Warner Brothers, and not like social friends, but like they'd call me up and tell me to do a display, and I'd do a display, and
Mm.
they would give me tickets. This was back when you could get, I get tickets to see The Cure and this and that. So when the Ramones were coming, this was '89. I was like, hey, I want to do a in store with the Ramones in Charlotte, and they said fine. And so I helped set that up. And I think there was an in store in maybe Columbia the night before, and then Charlotte, and then I think the next night was in Norfolk. I finally did get to go to the Boathouse in Norfolk, which is one of the best places to ever see a show. Um, uh, but once John hadn't seen me. That was January '89, so John hadn't seen me or heard from me in a year and 2 months.
Yeah.
And so when he saw me at the in store, he was like, "I've met you before, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm, I don't know, I can't remember what I told him, but then at that in store, he said, well, come to the show that night," and it was at the Pterodactyl Club. And that's where Joey got that T-shirt that he's wearing in the Pet Cemetery video.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that? And I've seen some great shows at Pterodactyl. I saw Jane's Addiction open up for Iggy Pop on the.
Oh.
I guess that was the Instinct tour. That's the only time that I've been to a show where I've been afraid of being injured by the band. I mean, it was nuts. But so they played the Pterodactyl. And then John invited me to the Boathouse in Norfolk, which is like a 6-hour drive. So I remember just driving. I remember, it's very hilly there in Virginia. I can remember going up and down, getting to the Boathouse, being on the guest list, and then being in the front row right in front of John before the show. And his roadie, Rick Weinman, came out and said, "Is your name Rick?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "My name's Rick too. Johnny wants you to come backstage after the show." And so I was like, "Oh man, this is just great." So I got to go back afterwards and got, some things signed. And I remember John saying, "Hey Rick, make sure and get Dee Dee, make sure and get Joey, here's Marky, make sure and get this." And what I didn't realize at that time was that Johnny was an autograph collector too. He collected autographed 8x10s of baseball players.
Yeah.
He had maybe getting the number wrong, but let's just say that there were maybe 5,500 ball players that have ever played any half inning in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
John had maybe 1,500 or 2,000 signatures of those guys, and he would spend his time when he wasn't at the shows. He'd spend his time getting photographs, mailing them off to ball players, and asking them to sign it and return it. And he would always send two of the same photo, because a lot of times some of the older players, they would get that photo and they'd be like, "Oh, I've never seen that. Let me put that in an 8x10 and put it up on my wall."
Yeah.
So John was smart enough to say, "Here's two. Keep one for yourself. Please sign this and send it back." And I remember being in his apartment sometimes when he'd get the mail, and we'd go down to Old Chelsea Station when I would visit him, and get his mail, and he'd open it up, and there'd be a 8x10 of some ball player, and he would he had this huge book of all the baseball players that have ever played, and he would open the book. He was very methodical, and he has a little pencil, and he'd find the right guy. He'd make a check mark, then he'd go, and he probably had 20 spiral folders. He'd pull it out and go to the right page, and he'd put in a plastic sheet and put the autograph in and put it up. And so he was very meticulous. And so when he saw me there with my albums, he was like, make sure that you get Dee Dee, make sure that you get Mark. Cause I was, like a kid in a candy store. I was running all over the place, and John was just trying to direct me. And, it was just kind of a friendship that was starting to bud. It was like, here's this kid that's, obviously pretty smart, and he likes the Ramones, and he's polite, and, he sets up in stores, so he's useful. He doesn't drink, so he's not, coming backstage being drunk. So it was just kind of a relationship just kind of starting.
Yeah.
And what happened, see, that was January. I think Dee Dee left in August and CJ came on, and it was January of 1990. And the Ramones were supposed to do some in stores in North Carolina. And by that time, they knew who I was and I knew who they were. So I was going to set up several in stores. And I remember getting a call, maybe it was like January 18th. I think it was my birthday, and getting a call saying that Joey had hurt his foot or his ankle or something, and they had to cancel the shows, or they had to reschedule the shows. What he did was, Joey drank a lot. Mm-hmm. And he was coming off a stage. He went to see Raging Slab, which is a New York, great New York band back in the 80s. Went to see Raging Slab, I think it was New Year's, and he went on stage to do an encore of We're an American Band with them. And he was drunk, and he came off the stage and trying to get down the steps. And, he's clumsy enough anyway without alcohol. Yeah. So he fell and really, really tore ligaments and everything, and was in the hospital for I don't know how long, but that was the point when he decided to stop drinking.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever watch Howard Stern, but there's that famous thing where Joey called Stern and was drunk and was trying to talk to him, and he goes, I want to speak to Stern. Welcome to my nightmare. And so some of his drinking there kind of got bad, but I never saw Joey take a drink, because when I started hanging out with him in 1990, he was sober, which was great. But they had canceled the shows. So what I did was I was heartbroken, but I decided to take these lemons and make lemonade. So I went to the Eckards, the drugstore, and got one of those huge 2-foot by 3-foot get well cards. There's just, those huge ones.
Yeah.
And I took it to our store in Winston and got like 100 or 150 people to sign it for Joey. And then I mailed it up to their management, Overland Management. And, I thought that was the end of it. But then about a week or two later, and this is kind of the watershed moment, a week or two later, I was leaving work and I went, locked the door. Then I realized I hadn't set the alarm. So I go back in and the phone's ringing. And I'm like, man, I really don't want to answer this. But then I answer it. And the guy's like, hey, is this Rick Johnson? And I was like, yeah. He said, this is Monty Melnick from the Ramones. I have somebody who wants to talk to you. And it was Joey. Joey wanted to thank me for sending that card. And he talked to me for about 15 or 20 minutes. And it was just, it made my year.
Yeah.
And, that's just something about the Ramones, the kind of people that they are, that they will remember that they're supposed to sign autographs for a fan 2 days after they had talked to them, or they'll take the time to make a phone call to thank a fan that they don't know for sending them a get well card.
Yeah.
And so after that, I talked to Monty, and he was like, we're rescheduling the shows for May. Here's some current material, because I think I made the flyers with Dee Dee and Tommy in the band. So it was just kind of, the whole friendship thing was kind of a progression, because people ask, how the hell did you make friends with those guys? And you see people like Led Zeppelin or AC/DC or, Weezer or whoever. It's like, they're my favorite band. How can I make friends with them? Because it's hard. but for me, it took several years. But there was something. Um, I was put up for adoption when I was a child. My parents were students at Duke, and so I was adopted by a great mom and dad here in North Carolina. But it turns out that my birth father's mom, so my birth grandmother, grew up in Forest Hills, Queens,
Huh?
which is where the Ramones are from.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's that connection, because I'm not your typical, Southern redneck.
Yeah.
But, and from then on, I think and if I start getting ahead of myself, you just tell me to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're fine.
Um, so I was going to write an article for our record chains newspaper. It's called the Music Monitor. So the Ramones were playing three shows in Virginia, March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1990. And so I decided to go up there and interview them. So I went up to the show in Richmond, and no, it wasn't in Richmond. It was in Charlottesville. And I saw the show, and then it's just so cool. I went up to the backstage area, and I said, "Tell Johnny Ramone that Rick Johnson's here." And I'm like, "There's no way that this is going to work," and it did. And they let me in, and I had a couple of autographed baseball 8x10s for Johnny, and
Yeah.
I had some letters that people had written Joey, and I just got to sit back there and just got to be kind of a part of it. And then the next day, they were playing Mary Washington College or something like that, some college. So I went there and interviewed them. But I interviewed, so I spent an hour with CJ, spent an hour with Marky, and I recorded it all. I spent an hour with John, an hour with Joey. And from those interviews, I was able to make a really nice article that sounded like they were all in the same room at the same time.
Yeah.
But I gave Marky the same amount of lines as I gave John or Joey, and I gave CJ, his own section. So I think, I'm one of the few people that at that point was friends with all four of those guys individually in the 90s because Johnny and Joey hated each other. So you really couldn't be friends with Joey and friends with John. But I was, for some reason, I think probably because I kept my mouth shut, because they would say things about the other one to me, and they would know that I would not go and tell the other one.
Yeah.
But then that next night, I had been invited backstage the first night. The second night, I had been invited to sound check. But then the third night, they were eating. And, when you break bread with somebody, it kind of changes things. And they invited me to sit down. I think the club or the university had made a meal for them. Mm-hmm. So I got to sit down and eat with the Ramones. And it was just such a great experience. And then, I saw the show. And then when they came to North Carolina, Georgia and North Carolina in May of 90. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. I wanted to stop because I've been just going on for 20 minutes. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I did want to touch on something you said. You mentioned Johnny, and how meticulous he was with the baseball autographs and everything else. I've always heard that a lot of that with Johnny carried over to the Ramones, and that he documented virtually everything. That's one reason that we have such accurate dates for lots of things. I mean, down to I've always heard he had receipts for when he bought certain guitars and things like that. That he was like that with just everything in general, but particularly the band. That he would document lots of stuff and kept lots of receipts and paperwork and documentation. And that's one reason that, the Ramones, we have such a kind of a full picture of their career with very specific dates, and a lot of that can be attributed to Johnny. Was that just kind of his makeup and how he was about things?
Yeah, he was very, people kind of called him a drill sergeant or whatever, but he was, he kept records. What he did was he kept a little black book, and I've seen it. I was in his apartment when he, he and I went to meet Jim Bessman at this coffee shop. Jim wrote the first book about the Ramones called The Ramones, an American Band.
Yep.
And I went with John to meet Jim Bessman. I just happened to be in New York. And John carried his little his little book. It was like, just about, it's like one of those, 3x5 or 5x7 leather bound notebook things. And he had written every show from the very beginning. And he gave that. I was like, I can't believe he's given that to Jim Bessman to photocopy, because in my mind, I guess it was 92. In my mind, I mean, like, that's like the Holy Grail,
Yeah.
But that's where we have that. And that's why Monty's book has every date in the back. It's because of John. Tommy, I think Monty calls Tommy the architect.
Yep.
Because he, helped them with the sound. I think the drumming has a lot to do with the sound, and Tommy basically invented that, sound of drumming. And, but John, John kept a detailed record, and I'm glad that he did,
Yeah. And it's almost like the Ramones worked because it's almost like everybody kind of knew their lane a little bit, right? Because, right, Johnny was the quote unquote drill sergeant, the business guy. Joey, right, the poetic, the lyrics guy, the whatever. And then everybody kind of had their thing, right? With Tommy, right? Not originally thinking, Tommy wasn't intending to be the drummer, right? He was just putting this thing together, wanted to produce, wanted to do this, and they couldn't find a drummer. Tommy trying to show people. Tommy just did it himself. It's like everybody kind of knew, for the most part, knew their role, knew what they were doing. I mean, even when you break down with Monty being with them from beginning to end, Arturo being with them for so long, anybody it seems like they had a relationship with or a business partnership with, it seemed like it lasted because everybody knew what they were contributing to this team, and then it worked.
I think that's a really smart and astute point, and you're absolutely right. Everybody had their own lane. Everybody had their own job. They weren't stepping all over each other. They knew what they were supposed to do, and it also grew kind of organically in that, the smaller shows were earlier, and then they added a couple people. But the other thing that you said that I want to touch on is the longevity of their Monty was there from beginning to end. And I'm going to tell you, I was there, as a fly on the wall for a couple of those arguments that, I was not sure that Monty was going to quit, because, he did not always get the respect that he deserved from John or from Joey. But Monty, and I try to tell him this, how important he was to that band.
Yeah.
Driving, because, sometimes those guys could be nutcases.
Yeah.
Just being that guy that could take the abuse, could take the teasing, and, take them getting mad when there's no reason to get mad. And do it from beginning to end. And the same with Arturo.
Yep.
And that says a lot, and I think their manager, Gary Kurfürst, I think Gary was with them up until '92, and then a lot of the roadies
Mm-hmm.
were there for a long time. And what that speaks to is how the Ramones, as an organization, would treat the people around them.
Yeah.
If you have somebody like I've worked for people, this guy who was doing this festival in New York, and every year it was brand new people. And I remember him saying, "Hey, we got a brand new crew this year." And I'm like, that's because you treat everybody like shit,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
So it says a lot about the Ramones that although they were not the most generous folks in the world, they inspired loyalty. They inspired longevity in their band members and employees. So they were a really great organization. You know, I know that they were a rock band or a punk band, but you know, it was Ramones Incorporated. You know,
Yeah.
even after Dee Dee left, Dee Dee was still writing songs for them.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, when
Absolutely.
have you heard that? You
Yeah.
know,
I mean, Tommy leaving and still producing, and just yeah, so many things, and again, like you said, right? I mean, Johnny and Joey
are you
not
still?
getting along. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, John and Joey not getting along and
Yeah.
still riding in that van.
Yeah. Still knowing, hey, all right, well, we don't have to be friends. We just got to play in a band together, and
Yeah,
understanding that you know what, you don't always like the people you work with, and that's what
yeah,
this is, and we can make this work. And it's very unique in the music business, the way they approach some things.
it really is because you always do. You remember that thing on VH1 Behind the Music? It was,
Sure. Yep.
you know,
Yep.
everybody was all for one, and then they had some success, and then there was creative differences, and then they broke up, and then you know,
Yep. Yep.
and the Ramones were just like, you know what, this is what we're doing, man. We're not breaking up. You know, I never saw. I know Joey and John didn't like each other because you know they told me they didn't like each other, but
Yep.
I never saw them have an argument,
Yeah.
and they would talk to each other when it was necessary.
Yep.
But you know, I rode around in the van with that band quite a bit, and
Yep.
I would not ride around with a bunch of guys that where the air was so thick with tension that you couldn't breathe. It was a fun time riding with those guys from New York to Boston or from New York to Allentown or from New York to DC. Those were fun people.
Yeah.
And even though they didn't all, you know, I think John and Joey were the only ones that didn't like each other. Mark got along with everybody. CJ got along with everybody. The other guys got along with everybody. It says a lot about the band and their unity of purpose. But you know, I remember I'm friends with Ira Robbins that put out the great Trouser Press magazine for 10 years from 74 to 84. And Ira had written this article, you know, what would other bands or what would musicians be doing if they weren't musicians? And like Joe Strummer was a political Joe Strummer was a political activist.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Rotten was a child psychologist, and it got down there to the Ramones. It said the Ramones unemployed.
Yeah. I mean,
And so I was like, well, you know, maybe the reason they're sticking together is because, you know, this is all they got. I remember John
yeah.
saying, I will never be in a band as good as the Ramones, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to try.
And they had such a sense of self-awareness too, right? I mean, they got to that point, right, where they tried to have the hit, right? They wanted to have a hit, obviously, right? But when it didn't happen, and I think they kind of self-realized, hey, we're not going to be a top 40 band. Okay, well, our bread and butter is in the live show, the merchandising. So we're just going to keep playing live, keep making our music.
Yep.
They didn't alter their sound much.
They really didn't.
Yeah, I mean, you know, much in the same way, you know, like an AC/DC, right? They knew their lane,
Yep.
and they did that, and it worked, and they're happy. And and so many. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean,
And you have to think about the immense pressure that went that was on them in the 80s. You remember the 80s. Everything you hear
Mm-hmm.
from the 80s is electronic or this or,
Yep.
has that sound.
Yep.
They were probably under immense pressure to change their sound.
Sure.
And they did not. I mean, there was some, some organ or something, in Too Tough to Die that
Yeah.
Dave Stewart did, but all the way through and all through hair metal. Do you remember like all the bands that
Yeah.
just went hair metal?
Yep.
But like Noah's Flood just wiped all that away, and what was
Yep.
left standing is the trees with the strongest roots. It was the Ramones, and then right behind that was grunge. And that's when the Ramones in
Sure.
the early 90s, that's when they got their due, because those guys, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Metallica, that's, not grunge, but all those guys, Rob Zombie said, hey, we looked up to you when we were growing up. And so the fact that the Ramones remained true to themselves all through the 80s and into the 90s is really a testament to those guys. And I think that's, one of the reasons that their music is still so popular. Like you'll listen to, they'll play Winger or, Kicks or something like that on the radio, and, or some of the 80s pop. And it's kind of funny, but, you play the Ramones and nobody's laughing. I mean, that's good, serious music that never compromised,
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, like you said, in the 80s, they could have changed a couple things, done this and that, and they probably could have had a big hit, made a lot of money, and caved in, right? I mean, they could have, right? They were just a few steps away from cashing in on that hair metal if they wanted to.
I don't know. I mean, I knew those guys pretty well. I don't know if they had it in them. I mean,
right. I'm just saying, theoretically, musically,
yes.
If they had wanted to just purely make the money, they could have. But like you said, right? If you listen, even if you go all the way back to their debut album, and you listen to it now, it doesn't sound dated. It does not
really
sound
doesn't. It's really
like an album from the 70s, right? It sounds like something, if it was put out now, it would it just sounds as fresh as anything, right? It stands.
Yeah.
And because they weren't a fad. They weren't a genre per se. They did their thing. They stuck with it. They were a little more, I mean, what I would call more defining than following. And it worked for them. But we talked, right? They never really had, quote unquote, the big hits and whatnot. So they came to be known as truly a live band. And you saw them, 106 times? Is that right?
106 times, and I still have some of my hearing left. Yeah.
That's remarkable.
I know, right?
Yeah, of the 106 times, do you have any shows that particularly jump out at you as special or unique, either from a good or bad perspective, or just being different? Are there any shows that jump at you as your favorites or most memorable?
Well, before I go into the shows, I just want to make sure that I talk about those 2 weeks in May of 90 that I'm not going to go over all the shows, but that was just kind of a defining moment where I really, really became friends with them.
Okay.
Do you want to do that before or after I talk about what my what's best for your show?
Do the favorite first, and then I'll bring that up.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, there were a lot of good ones and a lot of fun stuff that happened in, especially some of the early shows that I saw, because, that's when the Ramones, I mean, that's when it was really new to me. But I think, one of the coolest things was I drove up. I was at school at Athens, Georgia. I got my master's in business at the University of Georgia in '95, and I drove up to Washington D.C. from Athens, which is a long way, for the WHFS festival. That's a great radio station in D.C., and they have a festival at RFK Stadium every year, or they used to. And so the Ramones were headlining, so I drove up for the show, and man, it was like, trying to think of who was there. Hold on just a second. Got some notes. This shows you, just how interesting things were in the '90s. This show had Primus, PJ Harvey, Soul Asylum, Tony Bennett, Courtney Love, and the Ramones, and probably some other people that I'm forgetting. So that show, I got to watch it from the scaffolding. When they build the stage, they have that scaffolding sometimes that goes up each side up into the air, like 40, 50 feet. Yeah. And, I had my pass and everything, so I was able to be on the side of the stage for the show. And I remember walking up the scaffolding and seeing a sold out crowd at RFK Stadium with their fists raised, just shouting, "Hey ho, let's go. Hey ho, let's go," during Blitzkrieg Bop. Yeah. And, the whole place, I think they had turned the lights on so you could just see all these people. And, that was just sort of, this was '95, the Ramones were still, were playing clubs, and they still hadn't played, their shows with Pearl Jam yet. So it was kind of a validation of, hey, the Ramones headlined this show. And I remember Johnny called me maybe a couple weeks after that, and we were just talking, and then he was about to go, and he was like, "Did you like the show in at RFK Stadium?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "You thought everybody was going to leave, right?" And John was like, "Yeah, I kept waiting, like after this band. All right, I guess everybody's going to go now." Or after Soul Asylum. All right, I guess everybody, was here to see Soul Asylum. And I was like, "No, John, they were there to see you."
Yeah.
And that was just kind of, because the Ramones knew that they were great, but at the same time, they had been doing this for 20 years and everybody else was having a tough time figuring it out. So seeing that, the kind of crowds that maybe they got in South America, seeing it in the U.S., and having John be able to see that and, know that he was, that those fans were there to see him and that they weren't going home, that was kind of the one. Mostly I like the small shows. I like the club shows where I can be in the front and, just catching guitar picks and, they can see me and I can see them and, it's sweaty and there's, 300 people in there. Those are my shows that I love, with me right in the very front. But that's one of the ones that sticks with me just because of that memory of, those fans, all those people. And, not all of them were Ramones fans. There's 20 different bands there. Yeah. Just they all stayed and they were just going, "Hey ho, let's go," with their arms raised. I can still see it.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about, seeing the Ramones, and when you first started seeing them right in the late '80s, but in that, we mentioned 106 shows you've seen, but the bulk of that is right through the '90s, right? That's prime Rick Johnson seeing Ramones time.
That's the sweet spot. About 17, 18 times a year.
Yeah.
and 35,000 miles a year on my car.
Yeah, yeah, and that's also right as the time period, right, as you're growing closer to the guys in the band and everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell us a little about this.
Well, they were after that, and thank you for asking that. After I interviewed them up in Virginia in March of 1990, I wrote the article, and it was coming out for the May issue of the Music Monitor, which was the Record Exchange's little magazine. And so it was a big deal. The Ramones were on the cover. It was, that magazine was delivered to, I think every restaurant or grocery store, newsstand. It was a free magazine, but it was sort of publicity for us. So it got dropped to like, Golden Corrals and all these places. So that was coming out, but we didn't exactly know when because, the production was a little slow. But it was May 1st, 1990. The Ramones were playing in Atlanta, and I was going to go see them. They were doing an in-store at Peaches or something the day before, the afternoon before. So I drove all the way down there and went to the in-store, and I got there, and I'm in line to get my album signed, and I get in front of Johnny, and he looks up and he's like, "Hey, Rick, do you want to go see the Braves today?" and I was just like, "Holy fuck! Yes, I want to go see the Braves." And he's like, "Well, let's see if we can get some tickets, and we'll go see the Braves." So after the in-store, me and a couple other guys went with him, and we went and saw the Atlanta Braves. It was it just happened to be an afternoon game. And so, Johnny, who I knew that he knew me, but, that was kind of a watershed moment there that, he invited me to a baseball game, and he was, he wanted to hang out with me at the game. And so we went to that game, and the Braves were in last place that year. And after Johnny Ramone visited, it wasn't Turner Field at that time. It was Fulton County Stadium or whatever that was.
Yeah.
They called it the launching pad, I think, back then. But after he visited, the Atlanta Braves won the pennant every year after that, from 1991 until Johnny passed away in 2004. So that was just like the strangest thing. So after that, we went back and we stopped at Taco Bell to get something to eat. It was just me and John and a couple of other guys. Then we got there at 6 o'clock for sound check, and I got some good pictures at sound check. And Marky was like, "Where'd you guys eat?" And I said Taco Bell, and he said, "Yeah, John loves Taco Bell because everything's under $1." Just kind of a little dig. So I saw that show, and then I had set up in stores and promoted them at the Charlotte store, at the Winston-Salem store where I worked, and then at the Raleigh store. And so they were coming to Winston, and I was so excited, and I was all excited. It was May 4th, 1990, and I'm supposed to go meet him at the hotel at like 4 o'clock, and take him over to the in-store at 5. And I get there, and they had gone to eat at the International House of Pancakes right across the street. And that day they had delivered those magazines. So the Ramones go into the International House of Pancakes, and in the lobby, there's their face on a brand new magazine, and with the byline, Rick Johnson. And so when I get there, not expecting it, they're like, "Hey man, it's a great article. Thank you so much. It's really great to come to a town and see that somebody's trying to promote the shows." And so we went to the in-store in Winston. I remember my father bought tables and chairs from Statesville and for the Ramones, and the employees had done a big banner, and there were hundreds of people in line. And then the show that night was incredible. I think they played Carbona Not Glue for the first time that I'd ever heard them do it.
Yeah.
And so it was just such an incredible homecoming to Winston-Salem, which is, just a tiny little town in North Carolina. I think it's the only town named after two cigarettes. But it, just, I don't know if it was because of me or because they liked that town, but they came back to Winston-Salem. They had never played Winston-Salem before. They played it in 1990, 1991, 1993, and 1995. So they played it 4 or 5 times before they retired. And then the next day they were playing in Wilmington, North Carolina at the Mad Monk. Mm-hmm. So I drove down there, and I was upstairs in the balcony area, the upstairs area before the show. And I saw this guy, and I was like, that looks like Donald Sutherland. And somebody said, that's Kiefer Sutherland. So I went over to say hey to Kiefer, and there was this girl. He had this girl sitting on his lap, turned the other way, like turned facing him. So all I saw was this big head of long curly hair. And so I was like, hey, I'm, Rick Johnson. I'm a friend of the Ramones, which I really wasn't at that time. And, do you want to go downstairs and meet him? And he was like, yeah. And then the girl turned around as Kiefer was introducing her. And he's like, and he and I at the same time said, Julia Roberts. And it was Julia. And she's like, I want to meet the Ramones too. This was before Pretty Woman had come out. So she wasn't really a big star then.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know why I was, trying to not be a jerk, but, just sort of tease her. I was like, I bet you don't even know any Ramones songs. And she's like, yes, I do. Rock and Roll High School. And I was like, you're going to have to think of one better than that.
Yeah.
So I went down and told the Ramones, told Monty, and then I came back up, and I was walking up to try to find him. And all I saw was like this huge head of hair just coming running right at me and grabbed me. And she was like, I've thought of another one. Rockaway Beach, and I guess I was 24. I guess she was 24, and just like a total kid, living the life. She was making Sleeping with the Enemy right then. I think Pretty Woman had come out, but it really hadn't blown up. And so, she bought me a drink and put it on Kiefer's tab. And then, I took them downstairs, and we've got some great pictures of them with the Ramones. And then her and CJ kind of had a thing. I think if Kiefer hadn't been there, I think her and CJ would have hooked up because she was really liking his tattoos and everything. And, but saw that show, and then, saw some more shows. I think I saw 12 shows over 2 weeks. There was an in-store the next day in Raleigh, and a friend of mine videotaped it. So it's out there, Record Exchange, Raleigh, the Ramones, May of 1990. It's really neat because it kind of shows the Ramones, doing the in-store, and then me walking around with them afterwards, showing them where the, different records were, because after the Ramones signed, they cleared the store, and then the Ramones got to shop for records, and their deal to go to a signing was that each Ramone got one album for free, or one CD. Yeah. And I remember John had wanted a Leslie Gore album because he was more into the 50s and 60s things. Uh-huh. So we had gotten him a Leslie Gore album, and CJ was always wanting, the local hardcore bands, and, Joey was always looking for some new band. And, Mark bought Kiss Destroyer on CD for his nephew or something. But that was really neat because that, is a moment in time that's out there on YouTube of that in store. And then I saw him a few more times. It was about 12 times in 14 days. The last one was in Richmond, like the middle of May. And I remember after the show, they told me to come over to the Holiday Inn where they were staying. And we got some photos of us in front of, was, I think back then they had not Mickey Mouse, but Donald, no, Bugs Bunny. It was some of the Bugs Bunny characters that were there in the Holiday Inn lobby,
Yeah.
and got those pictures taken. And then I had to drive home. I think I drove home that night to go to work, and they played 2 shows in DC that next 2 days. And I kind of wish, you would think 106 shows would be enough, but I always kind of wish. I always look at the ones that I didn't go to and wish that I had gone to them.
Yeah.
Because it was at that point it became hanging out with friends.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Johnny invited me, up to his apartment in New York, and so I went there in February of 91. I went up to see Johnny and had dinner with him and Linda in their apartment, and Linda cooked us dinner. And it turned out that my best friend in high school was he was up in New York, and he got an apartment with some other guys at 23rd and 8th Avenue, right down from the Chelsea Hotel. And Johnny turned out lived on 22nd and 8th. It was really, so I went and stayed with my friend, walked around the corner, and had dinner with Johnny. And then Johnny and I would go. We went to an indoor batting cage. And so, he took me there, and we both hit baseballs. And then we went to a poster store, and then we went to a video store, and then, wherever Johnny wanted to go, I was just going to follow him. There was, he said, "Do you want to go to the post office?" Yes. "Do you want to go to the grocery store?" Yes. "Do you want to go run this errand?" Yes. Because just like hanging out with Johnny Ramone was just like the greatest thing in the world. I mean, it was for a kid in his 20s to be able to become friends with and be socially accepted with, by his hero. I mean, there was nobody above Johnny in terms of people, in terms of musicians that I loved. And I sometimes wonder how I got there, but it was, from this interview, you can tell it was just one little step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. And right, you're talking about, a lot about being friends with Johnny, but you did mention earlier, right? You were friends with all the guys to some, different capacities. But I think I remember reading or hearing an interview with you where you said that at first it was difficult to kind of be friends with Joey because he did view you as quote unquote Johnny's friend.
John's friend.
Yeah. Yep. And because of that dislike between them and some of that tension between them. So how did ultimately you get, did you and Joey get to be friends and he ended up kind of opening up to you a little more and accepting you in?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And you have obviously done your research, and I am pretty amazed by the stuff that the mistake that I made came because I remember after that first article in 1990, Joey came up and he said, "It's a great article. You've really got the knack." I remember Marky said it's one of the greatest Ramones articles I've read, and it was because, I think because I put a lot of his stuff in there because, Mark's a smart guy, mm-hmm. and Mark has become extremely successful over the past, has it been 30 years now? I mean, He has the radio show. He has, he tours the world. So Mark is, but he didn't always get included in the interviews. But the next year, the Ramones came back in 91, and I wrote another article, and I called Johnny, and this shows you how I called Johnny the king of punk.
Yeah.
And this shows you how these guys, musicians, sometimes you think, they're really tough on the exterior, and they may be, but a lot of them are sensitive people. And I remember being in that van with the guys, and Joey was like, Rick, you can't just call Johnny the king of punk. We're all the kings of punk. It's the whole band. It's not Johnny. Johnny's not the king of punk. And I didn't realize, nobody had ever told me that Johnny and Joey didn't like each other. And nobody had told me the whole thing about Joey dating Linda, and then Linda ending up with John. Nobody had told me that. So I didn't know. I walked right into that. And from that moment on, I remember Joey, and most of my time was spent with John anyway, but
Yeah.
I remember getting the cold shoulder from Joe, 91. He still would sign stuff and everything, but 92, 93. But it wasn't, Joey was not a hostile person. He was just quiet.
Yeah.
So I remember one time, I guess this was 92, he must have thought that I was, a hardcore Republican or something, because I remember being in New York and walking down the street, and there was Joey. I don't know how it was like up in the 60s. I don't know how I ran into him, but he was like, "Oh, Rick, what are you doing? You here from the Republican National Convention?" And I was like, "No, Joey, I'm here to see you. You're playing, a couple of days later at something." So now looking back on it, I can see he thought I was John's friend, and he actually wrote something for this magazine called Addicted to Noise when we were starting to become friends, and he was like, I used to think he was just John's friend, but he's a really good guy. But where it changed was August of 94. I drove from North Carolina to Canada, to Toronto, which is a long way, to see those guys play. And so I saw them in Toronto because I had a couple weeks off from school during the summer. And then I guess they were leaving Toronto, and I noticed Joey was kind of hanging around my car, which was parked behind the van. And Monty was like, "Go ahead and ask him. Go ahead and ask him." And I was like, "Ask me what?" And Joey goes, "Can I ride with you, in your car instead of riding in the van?" And I was like, "Fuck yeah," but he was unsure about it. He was like, "I don't know." Joey was he waffled a bit. So he was like, "I don't know if I'm going to like this. I don't know." And I was like, "Well, look, we're going to," I don't know if it's Dave Hortons or whatever that place is called. It was like a Cracker Barrel. We're going to, we're riding over here to Dave Hortons. Ride with me to Dave Hortons. See if you like it. So he did, and we sat and had some French fries. The other guys ate, and then he decided that he wanted to. He got in my car, and it was a little tiny 84 black 84 BMW 318 318i, which had at the end of my Ramones days had 500,000 miles on it, and every Ramone had not every Ramone, but Johnny, Joey, Marky, and CJ and Monty had ridden in it, which was pretty cool. But I remember getting in the car, and John, all the other guys piled into the other car, and immediately, and keep in mind, this is going from Toronto to Ottawa, and I had never been in Canada before, I don't think, and I had a map, and it became lose Joey as fast as possible. It became a game of lose Joey, which really meant lose Rick.
Yeah.
So they got in the car. I mean, they got in the van and sped off. And so 30 seconds into it, Joey, the lead singer of their band, and I were alone in Toronto, Canada, and we had to navigate our way to Ottawa for, I think they had a day off, which helped. So
Yeah.
Joey and I had a beautiful ride through the countryside of Canada in 70-degree weather in August, and we were able to listen to. I had just gotten a CD player, this kind that you plug into your cassette deck.
Mm-hmm.
He had just gotten a Who box set. So we were able to listen to the Who and talk about things. And he was able to open up, and talk about, his frustrations with John, his frustrations with this and that. And I think, then we stopped to eat and stopped to do this and just laughed and had a good time. And it was on that trip where we became friends, and he realized that I wasn't just John's friend. I was I'm not in anybody's camp except the Ramones camp.
Yeah.
And then we drove from Ottawa to Montreal, which was great. And they lost us again. It took like 30 seconds for them to lose us. And so I drove Joey to Montreal, and we had some time to kill before the sound check. So we walked down the street and see if we could find a pool table. Because Joey and I had played pinball, one of these small towns, a club a few nights before. And so we were looking for a pool table, and we got there and found a pool table and started playing pool and drew a bit of a crowd. And, because it was right down the street from the club. So as soon as my game was over with Joey, everybody else wanted to play Joey. and it's like all these people had their quarters up. You know how you put your quarters up?
Yeah.
And I was like, so I just, for the next hour and a half, just got to watch people play pool. But Joey was having the time of his life. It was like he was in because Joey spent a lot of time when he was drinking. He spent a lot of time in bars, hanging out, playing pool, talking to people. And this was, I represented somebody that would take him away from the daily grind of being on tour with the Ramones and being so structured and, not being able to go play pool, not being able to stop where he wanted to.
Yeah.
And I remember that night, and I'm ended up being Facebook friends with one of the guys that up in Montreal played pool with Joey, and we still talk about it. But that night had a lot, helped a lot. And then I think the fact that nothing he told me got back to John. I wasn't one of those guys that would say, "Hey, John, Joey said this,"
Yeah.
And so that was the period. And then from then on, Joey and I were friends. And, he would, if I was up in New York, and this was 94, probably 95, he had a spare apartment. It's that apartment now that somebody's trying to sell. That was Joey's first studio apartment. I would crash in it and spend the night in his spare studio. And it was right near St. Mark's. It's at 9th Street and 3rd Avenue, right near St. Mark's. And I remember, 2, 3 in the morning, just going out because the room, the door had a combination on it. So I would go out and I'd get pizza 3 o'clock in the morning and, just be out there on St. Mark's. And, then I'd look at, there were some boxes of his stuff. I wouldn't ever touch anything, but some of the boxes were open and you could see there were handwritten lyrics of stuff and photos. And I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
I would have liked to have I would have liked to have had those, but
Sure.
that was one thing, is that I never betrayed their trust, because something that musicians and, pretty much everybody, but especially famous people, experience is people getting close to them and then screwing them over.
Sure. Yeah.
So
And
that was something that I never did.
yeah. Well, and we talked about, right, most of these shows you saw were through the 90s, which would have been the Marky CJ rhythm section. And I remember Joey often said that CJ kind of kept the Ramones alive and gave them a whole new life because he brought this youthful energy to the band. Um, and you mentioned CJ a little bit, but what did you think of CJ during this time? Is that a fair statement? I mean, he was quite a bit younger than the other guys. Did he kind of give a second life to the Ramones during the 90s?
Absolutely. And everything you said there was absolutely true. I saw the Ramones in 87 and 89 with Dee Dee, and Dee Dee was, there was this cloud. There was this cloud around the band. They were very closed. They were, the backstages were very, very solemn. It was not, the shows weren't as good. Johnny was not as happy. It was a very, whatever mental issues Dee Dee was having around that time, and there were many, were, they all rode in the same van. So, those would come out, and John, and Joey were very proud of their music and of what they did. And Dee Dee sometimes was just not, not playing as well as he should, because, he was on drugs, because he was on this or that, or he was on antidepressants, or he was pissed off, or because he wanted to be a rapper, or,
Yeah.
whatever. But I remember the backstage area in 87, having a curtain behind it, and in front of it. And then I remember March of 90 going up to see them in Virginia at a couple of these colleges. And it was just a whole different spirit. It was light and airy. CJ and the road crew were tossing football back and forth inside. I remember, and I've got pictures of it, Johnny was playing stickball with some of the road crew. I remember him measuring off a strike zone to call balls and strikes, because that's how John was. He's, if you're going to play
right.
It's going to be, that's not a strike, that's a ball. See? But I actually have a picture of John. I'll send it to you. Putting up the black tape to make the strike zone.
That's great.
And it was just such a happy place. And CJ was my age. CJ is 3 months older than me. He was born October 8th, 65. I was born January 18th, 66. So here they have the guts to put a 24-year-old who, if they're not doing their thing, could make them look really old.
Sure.
Because John was born in 48. So John would have been 41 at that point. That's 18 years,
Mm-hmm.
So John had to step up his game, and CJ was good. CJ is a good bass player, and he brings the energy.
Yep.
And he was very easy to teach. He wanted to learn. I think his general attitude has always been wonderful. He would, sometimes he would give me his hotel room if he didn't need it, or he was always, just, hey, Rick, never played the rock star role. He would always hang out at the merch booth with Truckee or whoever was at the merch table, and he was always just accessible.
Yep.
And he made everybody happier.
Yep.
The whole place was happier. So CJ was without a doubt, one of the best things to ever happen to the Ramones. And it came at just a perfect time.
Yep.
And I've heard from the guys or from some people that Dee Dee wanted back in, after he left, Dee Dee wanted to come back. And the guys were like, no fucking way. I mean, it's, this is like night and day.
Yeah.
I remember Joey saying during the interview, he was like, with Dee Dee, I remember Joey saying, and I'll send you that article. It's I've got some extra copies. It was CJ's great. He gets along with everybody. With Dee Dee, there was always some sort of unpleasantness.
Yeah, right.
There's always some shit going on. Plus the fact that he just really wasn't playing all that well from what I could. I mean, I remember the first time I saw him, I was like, oh boy, I guess he didn't get that coat before the show, that, and, he was just, I mean, I saw him 100 times with CJ.
Yeah.
I only saw him 6 times with Dee Dee.
Yeah.
And I didn't see Dee Dee in the 70s.
Sure. Right.
Because I was 11, so Dee Dee may have been incredible back then, but CJ was exactly what the band needed at that time. And, he's just absolutely wonderful. And he continues
to
be CJ Ramone and to hold the banner very proudly and very respectfully for the Ramones.
Yeah.
And, he's probably one of the easiest Ramones to talk to. People, a lot of people got to know him better than anybody else. So hats off to CJ. He was just a wonderful guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, even since he's right, CJ's been a great ambassador for the band since. He's always represented them well. Right? He did some strong solo stuff. Right now he's doing a lot of stuff with Me First and the Gimme Gimmes and other bands, and he's just out there having fun. And it's like he still has that same energy about him, and I don't think he's ever ever betrayed that trust that choice they made. I think he's only proven over time that it was the right decision. He was the right guy.
I think that's an excellent statement. He was the first guy to I'm sure you know the story. He was the first guy to try out, and John was like, "That's him.
Yeah.
We need a young Dee Dee."
Yeah.
And John was right.
Yeah, and and Phil and Dee Dee, right? I mean, Dee Dee. Everybody says, "Oh, Dee Dee's so punk rock," right? Dee Dee wrote a lot of great songs. Dee Dee did this, right, and whatever. I mean, for whatever he brought to the band, trouble wise there at the end, that's still no small shoes to fill when you're talking Dee Dee, one of the founding members, and CG. I don't think CG saw it that way. He wasn't filling Dee Dee's shoes. He was bringing CJ to the band. He didn't, he thought he was bringing his own flavor, his own feel, and I don't know. He just always seemed to have the right approach. And you could tell he was enjoying himself because he loved the band. You could tell he was a fan of the band and couldn't believe what he was, this position he was in, and it showed.
You're absolutely right. Everything that you said. Not to take anything away from Dee Dee, because I don't know that there'd be a Ramones or certainly not as good if it wasn't for Dee Dee and his multiple personalities. There's the good Dee Dee and there's the bad Dee Dee. And, the last time I saw Dee Dee was, and I was never friends with him and I have some friends that were great friends with Dee Dee and loved Dee Dee, but Dee Dee and I were not, I could never get through that, not facade, but we just never clicked. Joey and I clicked, John and I clicked, Mark and I clicked, but I just could never click with Dee Dee. But the last time I saw him, I flew up to New York in '99 for Mark and Dee Dee and Dee Dee's wife Barbara were playing the Continental Divide my good friend Trigger worked at the Continental for a long time, and they were playing as the Remains,
Yeah, right.
which was yeah.
Yeah.
So they played the show, and my friend Warren, who was a friend of Johnny's and drove the van for the Ramones towards the end, Warren Cohen was managing or tour managing Dee Dee and Mark. And so after the show, I went downstairs to the backstage area to get Dee Dee to sign a couple of his new book, his I think Surviving the Ramones, his book had come out.
Mm-hmm.
And, to see Mark, because Mark and I, had become friends. And Marky and his band stayed at my parents' house several times in the late 90s. And so when they were with Marky Ramone, the Intruders.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I really became friends with Mark. But I remember Dee Dee came into the backstage area and he hadn't gotten paid yet by Trigger because Trigger was working the door and couldn't pay him yet. And Dee Dee, I guess, had wanted to go score or cop or something. And he was furious. He was screaming and yelling. It's like, he's trying to rip me off. Just that typical New York thing that you'd think that Johnny Thunders or Cheetah Chrome or somebody would do. Just screaming. And it was sort of, it was so desperate. And I remember him, he had a switchblade. And he pulled that switchblade out and opened it. And he was like, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill him right now. I've got to get my money. And Warren was trying to explain to him, and I'd never seen that side of Dee Dee. I had never seen the bad Dee Dee. But Warren was trying to explain to him, no, Trigger's working the door. He'll give you your money. But Dee Dee just kept screaming and screaming and screaming. And there was a little closet in that backstage area. And the last time I saw Dee Dee Ramone, Warren was opening that closet door and gently pushing Dee Dee with his switchblade up in the air into that closet, shutting the door and putting one of those chairs up against the.
Oh no!
That's the last time I ever saw Dee Dee Ramone.
Yeah, that sounds fitting. So, we talked about how the band was, approached things often businesslike, right? They also at various times had kind of, through their career spoke out about not overstaying their welcome, right? Bands that went too long and everything else. So when they announced that they were retiring and then they ultimately followed through in 96, were you surprised at all?
I was very disappointed.
Yeah. Right.
What had happened that had led up to that was Joey was diagnosed with cancer.
Yep.
And I remember him. I didn't know what was wrong. This was 95. I remember driving. The Ramones were supposed to play in Orlando. So I drove from Athens, Georgia to Orlando to see the Ramones. And I get there, it's probably a 9-hour drive. I get there, there's nobody there. The Ramones had canceled, and I had neglected to call John before the show to make sure. So I called John from a pay booth there, and I was like, hey, Linda, is John there? And like, yeah. It's like, what happened, Johnny? He's like, we had to cancel the show. So Joey was missing a few shows here and there. He was, I guess getting treatment or something. But then I remember April 30th in 1994, they played this show in at Longwood College in North Carolina. And the way that show came up was, remember Rock and Roll High School where Riff Randall goes, come play my high school?
Yep.
And they did. Or they didn't play the high school, but
sure, the town. Yeah.
They blew the high school up.
Sure, yeah.
There is this girl that a couple of years, I guess it was 92, she asked Joey, will you come and play my college before I graduate? And she didn't hear anything. She didn't hear anything. And then she became a senior in 95. And so, she called the management office, and Joey remembered the promise. And so Joey canceled the show in, I want to say, either Richmond or Charlottesville, and played her college. So she bought the Ramones to her school, which is the coolest thing ever. And it's on YouTube somewhere. I can't, it's Longwood College, April 30th, 1995. So I was there for that. I was riding with the Ramones in the van, actually, from on that. And then so we rode to Raleigh, May 1st, 1995. And I remember coming down, and Joey was swimming laps in like this small pool, which is, if you've ever seen Joey Ramone in a bathing suit swimming laps in a pool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like seeing I don't know. I mean, it's just something that you don't see every day.
Yeah.
So anyway, and John's sitting at the bar. It's in the middle of the afternoon. And I go and I sit with him, and he's like, so we're retiring. We've decided. So it was that day. And what happened, I think, is Joey would, and I don't know this for sure. So, I mean, this is not gospel, but I have heard that Joey sometimes would say, this needs to be the next single. If this isn't the next single, I'm quitting. Or, we need to do this. If we don't do this, I'm quitting. And then I think John had wanted to retire because John and I would talk about when he was going to retire. And he was like, I got to make sure that I have enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what's enough, John? I was trying to get him to tell me, well, John, what's enough? And he would say, just enough. He wouldn't, which, I don't know if that's 2 million or 1 million or something, because I remember talking to John. John would give me a lot of financial advice. Joey was a smart dude. Some of the best stock advice I ever got was from Joey. I remember in 95, riding back in the middle of the night in the van, and I was always behind Joey, and I remember his big, long white finger, with there was some black on it from the tape, which came out of the dark, and he's like, and keep in mind, this is 1995. I don't know if Windows 95 was even out at that point. And he goes, my broker told me computers are going to be big and you should buy Microsoft and Intel.
He wasn't wrong.
He wasn't wrong. So, when I finally got my little job, I'd put, a little bit in Microsoft, a little bit in Intel. I remember he told me to buy Amazon. This would have been, I don't know if it was 98, 99. Because, Joey wrote that song, Maria Bartiromo.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
His whole day after they retired was he'd sit there and watch CNBC. And he told me to buy Amazon. So I bought 50 shares of Amazon in 98, which I think is worth like $250,000 now. So thank you, Joey.
Yeah.
But both those guys are really, really smart.
Yeah.
And I think John was waiting for the next time that Joey made that ultimatum.
Yeah.
And apparently he did. And then John said, fine, we're breaking up then. And so he told me, and I think they announced it. I remember Kurt Loder making that announcement. And then I went to dinner with them that night. And it was the nicest I had ever seen Joey beat a John. And they talked and they were talking, and it was just like, and you could tell, like when you have a fight with your friend or your wife or whatever, and then, the fight's over and then you're trying to make up,
Yeah.
So I knew something was up, and but it was great to watch them get along and, talk about how they needed a new manager or this or that. But yeah, I was surprised because you see the guys now, my good friend Joe DiLorenzo, he tour manages the Damned.
Oh, yeah.
And the Damned are 70 and they're kicking ass and playing. And,
sure,
we've got this, 3 of the 4 Sex Pistols getting back together. And the Circle Jerks, I think Keith might be 72. They're incredible. And they just played Coachella.
Yep.
But John was, John retired at 48. And I think that was his goal, was to never pick up a guitar again. He would call shows. He was like, all right, we're going to the next job. We're going to the next job. And, so he considered it work, but at the same time, he knew how fortunate he was. There was a magazine article, and they were interviewing Dee Dee or somebody or John. They were all there, and somebody was asking to interview Dee Dee, and Dee Dee was going, do you know how hard we work all day long? We work so hard. And John was like, you work 1 hour a day. And, so John knew that it was a job, but at the same time knew how lucky he was.
Yeah.
And that he was able to, because he was working construction when the Ramones got together, and he thought, I would do one album and I'd see it in the racks, and that would be my album. And then I'd go back and do construction. And, it turned out that was the only job that he ever had to have. And he got very, very wealthy through the way they made their money, as you probably know, is T-shirt sales.
Sure.
A lot of those things back then were cash sales.
Yep.
And the cash would, you have to self-report it. And, he probably did, but, they made a lot of money. This was him and Joey and Arturo. I don't know what the split was, but, John and Joey made, I think, John, I remember John telling me, I was like, I can't wait to get $1 million, John, so I can retire. And he was like, you can't retire on that. What are you going to do? Sit at home all day? You got to have at least 2 million. So John never told me his financial stuff. I never asked that much, but I imagine he probably, when he said enough, he probably meant at least a couple million. Because I remember him telling me, this would have been 30 years ago. No, wait, 25 years ago, that his accountant gave him a certain amount every month. And it was a pretty sustainable, you could live on that.
Yeah.
So I think that was his goal, is to get a bunch of money and then be able to live on it.
Yeah. And so tell me then, right after they retired, how did it impact you when you heard about Joey passing away in 2001?
It was really tough. Because I'd always hoped they'd get back together. I had always hoped for a reunion. They kind of messed it up. I think what they should have done is play Lollapalooza.
Yep.
Take a year off. Let Joey try to get better, and then come back and play some more. Because at that point, you had Pearl Jam was huge, Soundgarden was huge.
Mm-hmm.
You could, open for them and, then play your South America shows. You didn't have to do 150 shows a year.
Sure.
So that's what I would have done. But, and I think there probably was some talk about that. But it was really sad for me because Joey and I would email probably every day, and we would, talk about stock tips and this and that, and I'd call him on the phone, and we'd I still remember his phone number. Um, we would just talk about this and that, and I'd go up to New York and see him, and I remember, I guess 99, and then 2000, emailing quite a bit, and then and he was doing his shows at the Continental. He was doing his birthday shows and then his Christmas shows, and then he had the accident where he was outside his apartment and he fell on the ice, and he shouldn't have been. He shouldn't have been alone. He should have. Of course, I think about it. He was only 49.
Yeah.
But he was a clumsy 49. And he fell and broke his hip or broke something. And when you do that, you've got to stop the chemo and you got to, have the surgery. And so that allowed the cancer to get the upper hand, and he died in April. And I remember calling him, and the phone just kept ringing, and there was no answer machine, because usually you would get an answer machine. This was like 1st of April. I was calling him and emailing him and wouldn't get any answer back. So I called Monty, and Monty was like, "No, everything's fine," which is what a tour manager or a manager is supposed to say. He's not supposed to, not supposed to tell a fan or a friend or, Joey's business. And then, and it was a tough way to find out. I remember being, hey buddy, I remember being at work and going up to, going to Yahoo, which is where everybody went in 2001.
Yeah.
When seeing Ramones singer Joey Ramone dies. And so that's how I found out, which was really kind of sad. But it was really, it was tough, because he was a good friend of mine. He was my musical hero. He was the singer of my very, very favorite band. And plus, he was also a very good person.
Yeah.
So that happened. And then Arturo got right on with planning Joey's 50th birthday party, which, was only a month. It was May 19th, 2001. So I flew up for that, and that was a big celebration. I think Debbie Harry was there, Cheap Trick, the Damned, a bunch of people. Monty was there with Hilly, Crystal. Richard Hell was there, Little Steven. It was kind of a who's who. I remember Uncle Floyd. Uncle Floyd was there. Do you remember the Uncle Floyd show?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, Uncle Floyd was there. Danny Fields, Roberta Bailey. I mean, just, it was kind of a who's who. But there was a controversy around it where the Ramones were going to play. Johnny, Mark, and CJ were going to play, and there would be a microphone with nobody there and with just like a spotlight, but then Joey's brother, Mickey, he was planning it with his mom, Charlotte, and with Arturo. And I think Mickey had wanted to sing. And John didn't want that. John wanted his friend Eddie Vedder to come sing. And, this may not be 100% accurate. So if there's anybody there that's listening that I'm telling the wrong thing, I apologize. It's been a quarter century, but so I think I remember talking to John about this when it was happening, and John was like, "I'm not going." So So it turned out, to be a great show, but I think the Ramones were almost going to reform. PJ Souls was there. It was, she's Riff Randall from
Mm-hmm.
Rockaway High School.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so then it was over, and then we're all just kind of left. I think I wrote a couple of articles. I think you can find them on the internet somewhere. I remember Joey, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Something that I wrote about Joey for the local magazine, and yeah, it was kind of sad. It hit me harder than John's, because I didn't really know how sick Joey was, and then Dee Dee, passes away, and then John, and yeah, so it was. Yeah, it was kind of the end of your dream of the Ramones getting back together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, let's wind this down. They but obviously the Ramones, right? The impact goes on to this day. And we we've told a lot of stories. We'll have to have you back on again, tell some more stories in the future. But just real quick, tell us about Record Store Day. Right, we just had one just prior to us recording this. People can go to recordstoreday.com. It's an annual event. There's typically an annual release most years from the Ramones on there. Loco Live was this year, a release of that. So, tell us about that. I mean, that's a kind of a fun thing as records kind of rejuvenate in their popularity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Record Store Day is the single largest one-day music event. It's probably a couple thousand stores in the U.S. and then all over the world, in Japan and in Poland, Record Store Day Poland, France, just everywhere, all on the same day. There's all these hundreds of releases, and people line up, man. I'm telling you, they line up like the night before for these special releases. And the Ramones Incorporated, Linda, John's wife, and Mickey, Joey's brother, they've always been really good to Record Store Day. They put out in 2015. They put out a Ramones record player, the Ramones Crosley Cruiser, and I got to write the liner notes on the outside of the box for that. And then they put out in 2017. They put out this great Ramones singles box. Is really beautiful, and every year. This year is, I think 2022, they put out this box set of, it's called the Sire Years or something, but it had like Brain Drain, and it had Animal Boy, and it had Too Tough to Die, and it had Halfway to Sanity, and it was just a great box set. And then this year it was Loco Live, which was, I think it was released in 91, I want to say, as double LP. It's just beautiful. One is red, one is blue. And the neat thing is, when the Ramones originally released Loco Live, they hid a hidden track like you could do with CDs. The hidden track was Carbona Not Glue, which was had to be taken off of Leave Home, but it was, they snuck it in as a unlisted track after Pet Sematary. And so when this was coming out, I was wondering, are they going to do? It came out through Rhino Records. Are they going to do that? Are they going to put on Carbona Not Glue, and how are they going to do it? Are they going to be true to the spirit of the Ramones, trying to hide that and get that out? And sure enough, they it's on. If you look at the record, Pet Sematary, that track is like twice as long. You can see it twice as long as all of the other tracks, because the Ramones songs are like a minute and a half.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, they put Carbona Not Glue on that record. And Record Store Day has just a wonderful relationship with the Ramones, wonderful relationship with the Doors and Taylor Swift, and a bunch of different a bunch of different bands because vinyl has come back. And I remember
Yep.
last weekend just being at the record stores and seeing kids, teenagers. It used to be people in their 50s and 60s, and now it's everybody. And Record Store Day had a lot to do with records and vinyl and record players becoming coming back in and becoming part of culture. If you see some of these TV shows, somebody will be playing a record. I remember in the Walking Dead, somebody was I don't know how they found a turntable after the world ended, but somebody was playing Motorhead's "Eat the Rich."
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, Michael Kurtz, Record Store Day. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, like I said, people can go to recordstoreday.com and keep track of that each year. And Rick, thank you for coming on and talking to me. Like I said, we'll have to have you on again in the future. Tell some more stories and talk some more because I think we could talk for another couple hours again in the future. But I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I don't know that I've done an interview with somebody more knowledgeable and with a bigger love of music than you.
Oh,
What you're doing it the right way. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And please keep up the good work.
Hey, Bruiser buddies, I want you to listen to Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. Every week, he has the roughest and toughest interviews in the podcast world today, with the best guests you could ask for. There's no bums on this show. Let Dave Dynasty be your podcasting tag team partner and listen to Wrestling Nostalgia while drinking beer, smoking cigars, and busting heads. Just look it up on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe today, because the Bruiser said so.
All right, and thank you to Rick for coming on the show and talking to me. I feel like, 2 hours. We talked almost 2 hours there for that interview, and I felt like we could have just talked at least 10 more. I feel like Rick has so many stories, so many things to tell, and I have no doubts Rick will be back on the show in the future, whether it be for a specific topic that we might want to discuss or just another general interview just to go deeper and tell more stories. I think Rick will be a repeat guest because he's got so much to tell. Now, as far as the next episode, my guest will be announced in the near future on social media. The next episode, I will be talking and celebrating a bit the 30th anniversary of the Adios Amigos album that will be coming in July. So that episode will be available July 1st. I'm trying to get a guest to line up with the anniversary of Adios Amigos. That's what I'm gunning for. So I'm working at that, guys. But if not, I'll have somebody else. I've got other guests. No problem. But I'm trying to find someone that is directly tied in to the Adios Amigos album to be part of that celebration, that exploration of the 30th anniversary of that release. So thank you to all of you guys, all you listeners, followers, and everything else. Like I said earlier, be sure to tell all your friends and fellow Ramones fans about the podcast and help us grow. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Leave a rating and review if possible, and make sure you share the episodes on your social media. And make sure you are following us on our social media. We're on all the platforms. Just search for PinheadPod. Make sure, once again, share everything. Leave us feedback, suggestions. Tell us your Ramones stories. Share photos. Man, I love it all. So we're there. Share it with us. Let's talk about the Ramones. Let's make sure we celebrate the history of this band. And, and whatever else, man. I want to see it all and hear it all. So give us some interaction and feedback on social media. All right, guys. So until next episode, once again, thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying the podcast as much as I am putting it together and talking to all these great guests. But until next episode, be good, be safe, and gabba gabba hey.
Hey, oh, let's go. Hey, oh, let's go. Hey, oh, let's go. Hey, oh, let's go. I miss Joey Ramone. I miss Joey Ramone. I miss Joey Ramone. Joey Ramone.